huge investigation. They had 125 agents working full-time on the case. There was an 800 number that you could call. And, you know, they were getting, during the height of this, I think 20,000 calls a month from people who thought they had some tip or clue about who the Unabomber was. I wasn't just going to pick up that phone and call them. We didn't have strong evidence. I was afraid the best we'd get out of that is maybe, you know, an agent going to knock on Ted's door in the cabin, and guilty or innocent, he was in such a fragile, paranoid state of mind, I was afraid, you know, he might hurt the officer, he might hurt himself, he'd never forgive me. You know, this had to be done more carefully. But also I was very, very concerned about Mom. At this point, she was a 79-year-old widow. For years and years and years, she had worried about Ted because of his estrangement from the family, because of all these symptoms of mental illness. But believe me, her worst nightmare about what could be wrong with Ted didn't come close to what we were struggling with, this awful suspicion. You know, I was afraid if we told Mom, she might just kill her. You know, she might have a stroke or a heart attack. And so I had to, you know, worry about her as well. Actually, once we began to speak with the FBI, we asked them, we insisted, and they agreed to do a very careful, kind of phased investigation where they would not approach Ted, not approach Mom, and try by whatever means possible to rule Ted out as a suspect. But in the meantime, without telling Mom what we were worried about, we kind of prevailed on her to move from Chicago up to Schenectady. I mean, we said, Mom, the house is getting too much for you to handle. Why don't you move closer to us? And, you know, just around, we started that conversation at Thanksgiving 1995. At Christmas dinner in 1995, she finally agreed. She said, I've made my decision. I'm going to sell the house. And, you know, we found an apartment for her. She put the house on the market. And come about January, by this point, we were already talking with the FBI. We'd already had some meetings. I get a call from Mom, and Mom says, Dave, good news, the house has sold. I have a closing date. Could you help me? Could you just please maybe fly back to Chicago, help me pack up the house, and then, you know, drive me back in my car. I don't want to drive, you know, 1,000 miles to New York. I don't feel safe doing that. And so I agreed to do that. I took a leave of absence from my work for a week, flew back to Chicago. And so here's Mom getting ready to move. She's turning over a new leaf, and she's so cheerful, like she's so happy. And for me, you know, I can kind of see what might be around the corner. You know, I'm feeling, my heart's kind of breaking, thinking, Mom's happy, but she doesn't know what she might have to deal with pretty soon. But I was also a little bit troubled because when Mom was cleaning things out, she was moving from a house to an apartment, and she had to, you know, get rid of a lot of stuff, and she was ruthless. I mean, she's throwing stuff out left and right, including, like, some things that I thought might be evidence. Things that had belonged to Ted at one time. So I actually made an excuse. I snuck out of the house. I called my contact at the FBI, and I said, you know, Mom's throwing out lots of stuff. What do you want me to do? You want me to try to save it to the side? I mean, I don't want her to throw out evidence. And they said, David, don't worry. Just make sure all of that stuff gets into the garbage. We'll get the garbage. I said, okay, I guess this is how it works. I told him the garbage day was Tuesday. Around Monday afternoon, Mom comes back into the house. She'd been putting something out in the garbage, and she said, Dave, something really strange happened. I says, what? She says, I think somebody stole our garbage. And I'm thinking, I told him it was Tuesday. What's wrong with these people? You know, and I said, Mom, it's probably just somebody scavenging for cans or old papers. And she said, well, yeah, but, you know, I read this article about identity theft. You know, there are criminals going around getting in your garbage, finding your identity, getting into your bank accounts, et cetera, et cetera. I think I better call the police. And I said, Mom, please, I think you're overreacting, but Mom's stubborn. She called the police. So within like an hour, here's a uniformed town cop in our living room. Has no idea, of course, about the FBI and what they're up to. And she's taking they're taking a report from the little old lady who thinks somebody stole her garbage. And at one point, the officer looked at me and said, sir, do you have any idea who might have taken your mother's garbage? And I said, no. You know, at the time, I felt intensely uncomfortable, as you can imagine. I didn't want Mom to guess what was going on. But sometimes I thought back, what if I'd said, yeah, I'm pretty sure the FBI took the garbage. You probably would have thought this is like one pretty screwy family. Drove Mom back to Chicago, to Schenectady. And a couple days after we arrived there, I got the call that I'd really been dreading. The FBI agent whom we'd been working with most closely called me and said, David, I'm sorry to have to tell you this. We've done everything possible to rule out your brother as a suspect. Unfortunately, he's moved to the top of our suspect list. We're really at a place in the investigation where we need to interview your mother. Do you think you could arrange a meeting for us? So here I am, I'm saying, well, look, she's just moved. Can't you give her a little bit more time? And they said, no, we really have to move forward. We have to do it, we give you 3 days maybe, but then we really need you to approach your mom. So I remember it was on a Saturday morning. I was walking up the steps to Mom's apartment. I knock on her door. She opens the door. She's kind of expecting me. She has a smile on her face, but I see her smile, turn to a look of dismay. She says, David, you look terrible. Did something happen? And I said, Mom, I think you better sit down. Something I need to explain to you. And whether it was the years of worry about Ted or a mother's intuition, she just said, is it Ted? Did something happen to Ted? Oh my God, tell me, David. And I said, Mom, as far as I know, Ted is in good health. But I do have something that I need to explain to you. It's going to take a little while. Please sit down. So Mom sat in this little lazy boy chair. I always remember her sitting in this chair, watching television, reading a book. That was like her favorite spot. And I was just much too agitated to sit down. I was kind of pacing the living room floor back and forth and thinking, how can I drop this terrible news on Mom without crushing her? Is there some painless way to do it? And of course, there was no painless way. I started talking about the Unabomber case, and she didn't know much about it, but I talked about the places the Unabomber had been. Then I talked about places Ted had been. Then I talked about the Unabomber's manifesto, and then Ted's preoccupation with technology. And Mom got very, very quiet. She just sat in that chair, not saying a word, but obviously she was connecting the dots. She saw where this was going. She was just kind of gazing at me with this fixed look of horror on her face. I knew that Mom loved Ted with all her heart. I knew that she loved me with all her heart. What I couldn't figure out is, how does a mother put this together? How does she deal with what I'm going to tell her? And is she still going to love me when I tell her what I've done? That I've actually turned in my brother to the authorities on suspicion of murder. Anyway, I got to the end of the story. I said, Mom, I'm really concerned. I'm really kind of frightened. I don't know. I hope and pray that Ted's not the Unabomber, but I'm concerned enough, Mom, that I've actually gone to the FBI. I've shared my suspicions with them. They're currently investigating Ted to see if he might be the Unabomber. And I'll never forget what Mom did next. I guess there's certain defining moments in a person's life, revealing moments at least. Linda and I had the luxury of time. We could kind of think through our dilemma. It didn't seem to help. In some sense, for us, it was like watching a car wreck in slow motion and being unable to do anything about it. But for Mom, this was just sprung on her. She had to react, Anyway, when I said that, she got up out of her chair. And she's a very small woman, under 5 feet tall. And she just walked up to me quietly, reached her arms up around my neck,